Goodwin for her leadership. Dr. Goodwin and her colleagues planned an in-person event to raise awareness about this issue of child marriage by hearing directly from the survivors, just like we're going to do today. The event was scheduled to take place at UCI, which unfortunately had to be canceled because of COVID-19. We are thankful to Dr. Goodwin for co-hosting this event with us today and would like to congratulate her on being the recipient yesterday of a UCI 2020-2021 Academic Senate Distinguished Faculty Award. The award is the highest honor bestowed by the Academic Senate. It's given to a Senate member who has achieved excellence through their activities in research, mentorship, teaching, and service. At this time, I would like to introduce some of our notable guests here. Peggy Wong, she's a Deputy Attorney General in the Office of the Attorney General Criminal Appeals Trial and Writ Section and Council Member, City of Yorba Linda. Melissa Fox, Council Member, City of Irvine. Dr. Jose Moreno, Council Member, City of Anaheim. Ahmed Zahra, Council Member, City of Fullerton. Cassandra Perez with the Office of Congressman Lou Correa. Lashay Rodriguez, Chief of Staff, Supervisor Doug Chafee. Janelle Walker, Policy Advisor and Communication Director for Supervisor Doug Chafee and candidate for Santa Ana City Council Ward 3. Dave Min, candidate for the California State Senate, District 37. Danette Abbott-Wicker, candidate for City of Orange, District 3. Mike Gaska, candidate for the Irvine Unified School District, Board of Education. Alan Minsky, Executive Director, Progressive Democrats of America. Dr. Bill Honigman, State Coordinator, Progressive Democrats of America. Barry Simon, President of the United Nations Association, Southern California Division. Protima Pandey, Director, Office of Women's Policy at Santa Clara County. We also have attendees from UNICEF, Save the Children. Thank you all for being here with us today. And if you're an elected official or a head of organization and I haven't announced your name, please add it in the chat. As we mentioned, the mission of Global Hope 365 is to end harmful practices against women and girls like child marriage and human trafficking. On our board member, Dr. Melissa Withers, Associate Professor at the USC Institute on Inequalities on Global Health at the University of Southern California, has noted that by definition, child marriage should also be recognized as a form of human trafficking. Trafficking Protocol of 2000 defines trafficking as the recruitment, transfer, or receipt of a child for the purpose of exploitation. This definition can be applied to child marriage because the child is being transferred from one adult, the parent or the guardian, to another adult, which is the husband. Raising an awareness and education is key in this issue. Most Californians do not realize that child marriage is legal in California and 45 other states. In addition, California doesn't have a minimum age. On September 14, 2009, we launched at the UCI School of Law, we launched the California Coalition to End Child Marriage, a coalition of survivors, partner organizations, elected officials, and community leaders. They're all committed to educating the public and advocating for public policy change. Please go to the website of the CA Coalition to End Child Marriage.org and view the list of the members. Some of them are here with us today, most of them actually. What we also need to address are the root causes of this issue of child marriage. A patriarchal society, archaic laws, the need for gender equality and gender equity, and education on healthy relationships and the respect for women and girls. Our goals are education, prevention, and advocacy. Education through raising the awareness, Saving Lives campaign, prevention of future victims of child marriage and human trafficking, advocacy campaigns, including letters to elected officials and meeting with them virtually for now, and passing non-binding resolutions at the county and city level calling for no child marriage under 18, no exception. There is no moral justification for child marriage to continue to be legal in California and the US. We don't need to look at the numbers. We need your passion, our passion to end child marriage. We need to own this challenge and be responsible for change. And nothing can be changed until it's faced. We added some additional facts in our part. Child marriage of Article 16.2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that marriage shall be entered into only with the free and full consent of the intending spouses. UNICEF has defined marriage as an appalling violation of human rights. Child marriage is considered to be the most common form of sexual exploitation of girls. In 2016, the US Department of State published a document which expressed child marriage in other countries to be a denial of human rights. Yet it remains legal here in 36 states. And I submit to you that we need to take care of our own backyard and our own children before we can point the fingers at other countries. We had over 200,000 children, mostly girls, married before the age of 18 since 2000. Shouldn't we protect our children here in the US? Should we put a stop to the physical, including statutory rape, emotional, mental abuse that children go through and will be going through when they're forced and coerced to marry? So in the words of one survivor, I will end with this. She said, Rima, if I begin to weep, I will not be able to stop. This is what keeps me going until we can ban and child marriage in California and the rest of the states. It is entirely up to all of us, up to you, the citizens of California and the other 45 states and the international participants today to face this challenge and do something about it. The survivors are counting on all of us, and so are the potential children, the victims, who will be going through that trauma that will not leave them for the rest of their lives. In addition, if you are tweeting during today's event, please use @GlobalHope365 and use the hashtag #EndChildMarriage. There's a full list of hashtags to amplify your voice in the PowerPoint. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Michele Goodwin. Michele Goodwin is a Chancellor's Professor of the University of California, Irvine, and founding director of the Center for Biotechnology and Global Health Policy. Dr. Goodwin's expertise is in bioethics, constitutional law, family law, health law, reproductive rights, and torts. Professor Goodwin's scholarship is hailed as exceptional in the New England Journal of Medicine. She has been featured in Politico, Salon.com, Forbes, The Washington Post, The New York Times, the LA Times, the Boston Globe, Chicago Sun, NPR, HBO, Miss Magazine, among others. Professor Goodwin is at the forefront of national and international health policy discourse. She serves on the executive committee and national board of American Civil Liberties Union. In 2019, she received the Be the Change Award. In 2018, she was bestowed the Sandra Day O'Connor Legacy Award by the Women's Journey Foundation. That same year, Professor Goodwin was named Teacher of the Year by the Thurgood Marshall Bar Association. She's a highly sought after voice on civil liberties, civil rights, reproductive rights, and justice, and cultural politics. Prior to teaching law, she was a Gilder Lehrman postdoctoral fellow at Yale University. Please help me welcome Dr. Michele Goodwin.
Thank you so much for that incredible introduction, Rima. Thank you, I very much appreciate it. And I'm grateful to all of you who've joined with us on this very important occasion. It is not just that wonderful introduction that you gave, but your passion for this work, your commitment to this work, your commitment to being brave and courageous in this space is inspirational. So thank you so very much, Rima. and for being able to bring a gathering like this together. As you mentioned, we had hoped to do this in person, and then the very week in which the shelter-in-place orders went into place, we sheltered, and we were not able to bring together the event in person. But I'm so happy that you have done this virtually, so you are indefatigable. Thank you so much for doing that. And I'd also like to recognize the California Women's Law Center, which was also going to do this event. We were going to be joined in doing it in person. So what I'd like to do is focus on 3 points. I might get to a fourth. But the first is that child marriage exists in the United States. And that's really important because just as we've heard often from the United States, it's a pointing of the finger elsewhere. And so we fail to look at the challenges that we face right here at home. But that's important for us to do. And the second thing is that I want to acknowledge how brave it is that we have survivors that are coming forward to tell their stories, because coming forward is a very difficult thing. We've seen this in other contexts. I was in Dubai when the story hit about what happened at Penn State involving the raping of young boys. And right away, I thought, well, these young boys are credible. You know, the indictment had just come forward, and right away was there were statements of defense coming from those in leadership at Penn State. And they said, well, these are just people who are out to get money. These are people who have broken lives. Well, of course your life is broken after being raped as a little boy. Of course your life would be broken after being raped as a little girl. That is no defense to an actual abuse of a child. So it is incredibly important that we recognize the bravery and courage of individuals who come forward. And I also want to touch on how important it is that law must do a better job in these spaces. So let me begin by saying this. I agree very much with the sentiment that child marriage is child trafficking. In fact, that's a point of view that I've taken in my research, which has been in India, in South Africa, in the Philippines, and in other countries in this regard. In fact, one of the scariest places I've ever been to in my entire life is in Bihar, India, where there's such high percentages of child marriage. And I've met with parents, and I've met with girls. I've met with girls who are on their second marriage because the first husband died and the girls are only 13, 14, or 15 years old. So these issues are broad spread, but they happen here in the United States, and that's very important for us to understand. And part of the reason why there has been such a slow response in the United States to this, I believe, at both the federal level, although at the federal level, at least during the Obama administration, there began to be some attention to this, because for many years there was none in connecting the child marriage to trafficking. And part of that is because marriage itself has been held in such high regard in the United States as a political force. But it's important to look at what was behind that, because this was also holding up marriage as only something that heterosexuals could do. And it was also important to understand that marriage in the United States meant that women were property. Marital rape laws existed in the United States up and through the 1980s, and many exceptions continue to exist. So when we think about how sacred marriage is in the United States, we must remember the very heterosexist, misogynistic way in which marriage has been in the United States, baked into law. So let me just go through those points, keeping in mind time for today. Child marriage and child sexual abuse, child trafficking are issues for which we must be concerned about in the United States because they happen here. And for those of you who are looking for sources to point to your friends, go to the Washington Post and an article on October 15th by Terrence McCoy on child marriage, or you as a problem. Or you can look at the work in the New York Times by Nicholas Kristof, an article entitled "An American 13-Year-Old Pregnant and Married to Her Rapist." That's 2018. Or you can find other work at the New York Times, such as by Petrie-Norris on child trafficking and marriage, called "America's Child Marriage Problem." These are sources that you can point to, but if we're to look at the data, and the data, you know, the data spreads a little bit, but the numbers are alarming no matter how we see it on the spread. So for example, between 2000 and 2010, it's estimated that there were nearly 250,000 children some as young as 11 and 12 years old, that were married in the United States in that period of time. Other data suggests that between 2000 and 2015, there were similar numbers. And those numbers are not necessarily going down, except in states that have passed laws which forbid this. So just by those raw quantitative numbers, this gives us an understanding about how urgent these issues are in the United States. When I moved to Kentucky right after law school, I was stunned by the fact that new legislation in that state had raised the marriage age to 14 in that state, right? And so these are critical issues that are baked into law. And what's interesting is that they stare us in the face, except we've become blind to them, right? So the importance of this discussion today is to open our eyes to what is in front of us. Now, to think about how brave it is that the women with us have come forward, think about this: the level of stigma, of shame, of humiliation that we place on victims of abuse, of sexual abuse in the United States. And we can see, in fact, the ways in which the stigma and the stereotype fold into other areas for which we should be concerned. For example, data suggests that well over 70% of the girls in juvenile detention or the women who are incarcerated were people who experienced sexual abuse during their childhood. In fact, I've been in meetings with law enforcement where sadly, their perspective has been that juvenile detention is the best place for girls who run away from home because of sexual abuse. This so strongly connects with the fact that we still stereotype and we still stigmatize, because in what place would we ever think that incarceration is the best way to address someone who has been victimized? It is not. And in fact, if we were to even think about the enterprise of sex trafficking and prostitution itself, it's notable the rates of difference between how girls and women are arrested versus the men that put them in those positions. In fact, in the state of Tennessee, they've developed something that's called John School, which helps men, is kind of like a driver's school, you know, is sort of treating people who sexually abuse girls as they do people who fail to put their blinkers on when they make a right turn. And you can get out of the criminal punishment by going to John School. But I want to help root what I mean by the courage and bravery with the history of how we've treated these issues in the United States. And I'll be quick here, mindful of time, which is that marital rape was legal in the United States. A man could beat his wife with a stick or with any kind of instrument, so long as it was not thicker than his thumb. That is how we get the rule of thumb. These issues were very much baked into law. And what's important to know is that because there were, in some instances, no ground to how young a girl could be when she was married, in brutal cases involving rape, judges actually talked about how, well, we might punish him in this case, but we wouldn't punish him if in fact he had been married to her. So let me give you an example. In Commonwealth v. Fogarty, it's a case that involved the brutal rape of a 10-year-old girl. The Supreme Court of Massachusetts announced that the men who had, quote, ravished the child could not plead exceptions. In this case, they couldn't get off. However, the judge said, of course, it would always be competent for a party, meaning the rapist, to show a defense that they were actually married to the person and that she was the wife. And that's very interesting that a judge would even mention this in a case involving the gang rape of a 10-year-old, right? Is to say, you guys, that's bad, but had you been married to her, the fact that there was a gang rape, it would have been okay. This is where law has failed, and I could say so much more, but again, I want to be mindful of time. And I want to give a more recent example about what this means, where law has failed, involving this intersection between rape and children, and of course, the question of marriage. In my book, Policing the Womb, I have an epilogue. And in that epilogue, I talk about rape and a series of rape cases that I investigated over 6 months. And I just want to illustrate one story. And this is the case involving Judge McKeon and a 12-year-old girl. This 12-year-old girl had been serially raped by her father. He had admitted to it, that these were frequent rapes that he had done over the course of her life. The father had agreed to a 25-year plea deal, right? I've done it, and this spares me 100 years that the prosecutors want, so I will take 25 years. Judge McKeon reduced that sentence to 60 days. Hear me again, to 60 days. This is the failure of law. This is where we have to do better in law. This is where we have to do a better job educating, and where law must, in fact, we have to do a better job with being accountable. Final point that I'll make, which is that I'm so happy about the legislative efforts that are taking place across the country to do a corrective here that then will tie the hands of judges in a better way from slipping and allowing these kinds of things to happen. Thank you so much, Rima, for the work that you're doing. There's so much more that I could offer and say and that I've written about in this space, but I'm really, really mindful that we have incredible other guests to speak to us today. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Goodwin. And at this time, I know Assemblywoman Cottie Petrie-Norris is here. So at this time, I would like to introduce Assembly Petrie-Norris. She represents California's 74th Assembly District, Costa Mesa, Laguna Beach, Laguna Woods, Newport Beach, and portions of Irvine and Huntington Beach. Cottie Petrie-Norris is a businesswoman and community leader who was elected to the State Assembly in 2018. In her first term, she has secured dollars of funding our district, introduced important legislation to combat sea level rise, improve services for veterans, and help small businesses. Cottie serves as chair of the Assembly's Accountability and Administrative Review Committee and as chair of the Select Committee on Student Debt. She also serves on the Assembly's Committee on Appropriations, Revenue and Taxation, and Veterans Affairs. She grew up in San Diego, is a graduate of Yale University. Prior to being elected to the Assembly, Cottie had a successful career in finance and technology. She has helped build businesses and led teams at Fortune 500 corporations, small companies, and startups. And I'm proud to say that Assemblywoman Cottie Petrie-Norris is my Assemblywoman. And you've been with us when we launched the California Coalition to End Child Marriage. And we're happy to see you here again. Thank you for your continued support.
Well, thank you, Rima. Thank you for including me today and for inviting me to join this important conversation. I'd also just really like to express my sincere gratitude and thanks to the survivors who are part of this conversation today. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for your bravery and for shining a spotlight on this important and critical issue, and for everything that you have done to inspire the legislative progress that that Professor Goodwin just mentioned that's happening all across the country, and hopefully very soon right here in California. I have to say, when I learned that there was no minimum age for marriage in the state of California, I was completely horrified. California is one of only 10 states in this country that has no minimum age for marriage. We like to think of California as being a leader, as being a trailblazer, as setting the course for the rest of this nation. But this is an area where we are failing to lead, and where we are failing young girls and young boys all across this state. Previous legislative attempts here in California have fallen flat, and I want to talk a little bit about those and a little bit about the hurdles that we face as we work together to make progress in California. In 2017, my colleague, Senator Jerry Hill, introduced legislation to increase the minimum age to marry to 18 here in California. Like me, when Senator Hill learned that there was no minimum age, he was horrified. He introduced this legislation, assumed that other legislators would be similarly outraged and that the bill would enjoy an easy passage. And that is, in fact, not what happened. He faced surprisingly stiff opposition and from some surprising quarters. Legislators opposed the bill, some arguing that teenagers who were 16 and pregnant should be allowed to marry. And that perhaps is not a surprising course of opposition, but more surprisingly, the ACLU and Planned Parenthood opposed Senator Hill's legislation. The ACLU argued that it unnecessarily and unduly intrudes on the fundamental rights of marriage without sufficient cause, and that largely banning marriage under 18 before we have evidence regarding the nature and severity of the problem put the cart before the horse. As I mentioned, Planned Parenthood also agreed with that assessment and alongside the ACLU actively opposed this bill. As a result, Senator Hill's legislation and the law that was ultimately passed was significantly watered down. The law was passed in 2018, does place guidelines on judges who approve such marriages. It requires them to interview the parties to gain consent from parents and to report any suspicious circumstances. It also mandates data collection on child brides. However, the law failed to set any minimum age whatsoever for marriage. This is just not good enough. And we should be outraged. We should be horrified, because let's remember that despite these somewhat elaborate and confusing arguments against the implementation of a minimum marriage age here in California and in other states, despite the fact that many states in this union do allow children to wed, the federal government considers marriage under the age of 18 to be a human rights abuse. Well, I, like you, am committed to ending this human rights abuse here in the state of California, and committed to working with you to developing and advancing legislation that will establish the minimum age for marriage of 18 here in the state of California. So thank you again to the organizers, thank you to the survivors for being here, and thank you to all of the advocates who are here, who are shining a light on this issue and are ensuring that we are going to make progress on this critical priority here in the state of California. Together we can, we must, and we will end child marriage in California. Thank you, Rima.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we know you have another engagement and you will be leaving us soon, so thank you for making the time to be here. We also know that Dr. Goodwin has another engagement and will also be leaving, so thank you so much, both of you, for your time. At this time, and before we go to the next speaker, now that all the board is here, all my board is here, I would like to introduce the board and thank them for their hard work and support. Gus Tabia, Dr. Michele Withers of USC, Tamra Farrar, Dot Leach, founder of Women Drivers, an interfaith group of women, and Kristen Manna. And our counsel and a major donor, Daryl Sheets. I would also like to especially thank Elizabeth Sitton, one of the survivors we will hear from today, and Anna Bryan, our Director of Communication, for all the hard work and countless hours that went into making this summit a reality. I would also like to thank our professional facilitators today, Maggie Chumbley, Paul Tevis, and Nancy White, for donating their time and expertise. Thank you again, Elizabeth Sitton, for introducing them to us. At this time, I would like to introduce our next speaker. And our next speaker is Jeanne Smoot. She's with the Tahirih Justice Center. She's their Senior Counsel for Public Policy and Strategy. Jeanne has been at the forefront of national advocacy to strengthen protections for immigrant survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and other gender-based violence, including through provisions she helped draft and enact as part of the Violence Against Women Act. In 2011, Jeanne helped launch Tahirih's innovative forced marriage initiative after fielding a first ever national survey that helped reveal the nature and scope of this domestic human rights problem in the US. As Tahirih's senior counsel for public policy and strategy for the last several years, Jeanne has focused on leading the development of legal and policy proposals to address forced and child marriage in the United States at both the federal and state level. She's the principal author of a 2017 report that was the first comprehensive analysis of provisions in the marriage age laws of all 50 states and Washington, D.C., that leave children more vulnerable to forced marriage and other lifelong harm. The extensive further resources for advocates and policymakers that Jeanne has prepared as part of Tahirih's campaign to end child marriage in the United States include a 2020 policy brief that highlights progress, but also underscores reforms still urgently needed. To date, this campaign has helped drive or inspire new laws to end or limit child marriage in half of the US. Jeanne is a frequent presenter and media spokesperson with interviews by CNN, NPR, The Economist, The Houston Chronicle, The Washington Post, among many other outlets. Jeanne holds a GED from Harvard University and a master's degree from Tufts University's Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Help me please welcome Jeanne Smoot.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be with you all, and I should pay you more, Rima, for being my publicist. Thank you so much. The incredible survivors that you'll hear the stories of today have had to overcome steep odds just to be here, let alone to accomplish what they have in their lives and in this movement. And woven through all of their stories, you'll hear how child marriage undermines access to education, health, safety, and security. Research right here in the US shows that women who marry young face much higher dropout rates from school. They're 50% more likely to drop out of high school, 4 times less likely to complete college. They face up to 80% divorce rates, much greater likelihood of future poverty. In fact, teen mothers who marry and later divorce can face double the likelihood of future poverty. And some of this is related to childbearing. Teens who marry before the age of 18 can be up to 3 times more likely to have 5 or more children. They face more medical problems, including a 23% greater risk of developing diabetes, cancer, heart attack, or stroke, more mental health problems, including anxiety, depression, and some psychiatric disorders at rates 3 times higher than among women who marry as adults. They face greater vulnerability to abuse and multiple victimization. Girls aged 16 to 19 face victimization rates almost 3 times the national average. So the interplay of all of these harsh impacts can twist the arc of a girl's life into a downward spiral just at that crucial bend towards adulthood. So marriage before age 18, even if ostensibly by choice, can deny girls a fighting chance, really, to lead healthy and fulfilling lives. And there's a disturbing and arguably increasing overlap in the United States between child marriage and forced marriage, given changing social norms alone around delaying marriage to the mid to late 20s or not marrying at all. Those who are still marrying so young in 2020 are most likely, more likely certainly than in generations past, to have no real say in the matter. And yet many state laws perpetuate these antiquated and ill-informed notions about what's really in a girl's best interests. By allowing child marriage to persist, they ratchet up the risks that often already vulnerable girls face. So a pregnancy exception, as in many states, it can ignore evidence of rape or child sexual abuse. It provides a roadmap, actually, to predators to access girls 24/7 that would be utterly off limits otherwise. And then it literally gives a license from the state for a lifetime of further abuse. Given that a girl who is abused is 6 times more likely to become pregnant in the first place, and that a pregnant girl is more likely to be coerced to marry, you can see the problem. So let's take a parental consent exception, as in many states. That can conceal parental coercion, and parents' reasons can range from the well-intentioned but misguided to the self-serving and outright exploitative. Judicial approval exceptions, well, they're often lacking any real criteria or guidance, and unless a judge also vets the maturity and self-sufficiency of a girl and emancipates her, well, legally, she's still a child, and with a child's limited rights and options in case of abuse in many states. That can limit her ability to leave home, go to a shelter, get a protective order, file for a divorce, sign a lease, all these things. Even though married minors are automatically emancipated in California, that empowerment will come too late for someone who needed that to prevent the marriage from happening in the first place. So under loopholes like this, you've already heard well over 200,000 children under age 18 were married in the US between the years 2000 and 2015. And several states' data, including California's, wasn't even in that total. Most of those were girls, most married adult men, and sometimes those men were significantly older. About 2/3 of the girls were age 17, but many were 16, and some, as you heard, were as young as 12 over that period. So today, from these survivors, you'll hear more about the fallout of these lax laws, but I hope you'll also learn how these survivors have been working shoulder to shoulder with advocates and lawmakers in state after state to close those gaps in protection. And they've driven historic change all across the country. As you heard, in 25 states, they've enacted measures to end or limit child marriage just since 2015. Among other signs of progress, now 35 states set age floors of 16 or higher, 17 or 18, and 7 more states limit marriage licenses to legal adults, that is, minors who've been court emancipated. So the number of worst offender states is shrinking, and best or better practices are taking hold. And many states are putting in place a host of safeguards. So the stories you'll hear today, they are painful, they are powerful, but they are also preventable. But to do so, those laws have to be strong and thoughtful, and surface level solutions just won't be as effective in mitigating all these sorts of harms. So let's compare the post-reform results that we saw in 2 different sets of states. In Florida, they just raised the age to 17, and they limited the age difference pretty sharply to 2 years. But that just netted a 62% reduction in minors married, and there's still no judge, no visibility into what's really going on. And states that enacted still weaker reforms will see far weaker results. Let's take Virginia, Texas, Kentucky. These are all states that enacted robust reforms that limited marriage to minors who'd been judicially emancipated after a special hearing. Those states saw about a 90% reduction. And of course, with 18 as the minimum marriage age, it's 100%. So some states are lagging farther and farther behind in this growing a national trend. California, as mentioned, recently enacted some reforms that did make some improvements to the judicial approval process, but there are major shortcomings to California's approach. Not only is it a problem that there is no age floor whatsoever, there's no lower limit to how young a child can be married, so long as there's parental and judicial consent. Even after reforms, California's laws on majority, age of consent to sex, and minimum marriage age are wildly inconsistent. The state's criminal laws penalize all sex with minors. The presumption is that sex at young ages, and especially if there are large age differences, is inherently coercive. But those same laws provide a defense against prosecution if the parties are married. The context changes, but the coercion should be seen as the same. So let's put a fine point on those kinds of perverse disconnects. In California, there are no age or age difference limits in the civil law, but under the criminal law and outside of marriage, someone over age 21 who has sex with someone under age 16 could be subject to a felony and a fine of $25,000. So California's judicial approval exceptions, even after the reforms, lack many common sense safeguards, like appointing an attorney, considering the minor's best interest, or denying the petition if the intended spouse has a violent criminal history. And what's more, not every minor needs to get judicial approval in California or is subject to all the provisions. There are exceptions to the exception. The new law also mandated that data be kept on marriages of minors, but it hasn't been enforced. So we only have records for 10 of California's 58 counties. And what we do have shows at least one 7-year age difference, and this is post-reforms. So that said, again, as Rima pointed out, we don't really need more data to know that whether it's 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 girls a year, California can do much more to safeguard them from harm. A final point, survivor stories have been pivotal to these reform efforts, but they are not static, they are dynamic, and they are evolving. These women have become fierce advocates, and they are galvanizing and energizing and directing this national movement. Thousands of children are still married each year in the US, and each one of them is an individual story that you can help shape through the kinds of laws that you help pass. So You may be weary of the world's woes, and there are so many of them right now. But today, in this virtual room, I hope you sit up, take notice, take heart, and most importantly, take action, because this is something that you can readily do something about. And it's something that has enormous potential to change the entire trajectory of a young person's life. So thank you very much.
I was muted. Thank you so much, Jeannie. Thank you. Thank you. Now we go to our next speaker. But before I go there, I would also like to mention that Saudi Arabia had, on December 23rd of 2019, their DOJ issued a bulletin ending child marriage under 18, no exceptions. So it's about time that we catch up with the times here in the US. At this time, I would like to introduce Kate Ryan Brewer. Kate is an independent writer and filmmaker who was born in Seattle and raised in Southeast Asia. Since graduating from Florida State University Film School in 2007, she's lived and or worked in Los Angeles, Marrakesh, London, Sydney, Washington, DC, and Omaha. She's the director and producer of a new feature documentary on forced and child marriage in the United States entitled Nuts. You should see it. Once I started looking at it, I couldn't stop. It was phenomenal, phenomenal. Thank you, Kate. In November 2019, she presented a TEDx Omaha talk on the subject of the documentary, and the film recently won Best Documentary Feature at the 2020 Manchester International Film Festival. Though film festivals have been impacted by the global pandemic, the documentary Nuts continues to make waves and raise awareness around the world. Thank you so much. Kate, go for it.
Thank you so much, Rima, and thank you to the entire Global Hope 365 team for inviting me here to be part of this really incredible summit. Thank you to all the survivors and all the experts and advocates. It's an honor to be here. And thank you to all of you who are here attending this summit. It is really important that you are here because I fully believe that to truly grasp this issue, it is critical to listen to survivors. Like Jeannie said, you are going to hear some powerful stories today. And it takes immense bravery to share like this. And they're doing this so that we can all better understand what is happening and, more importantly, put a stop to it. So I personally didn't even know about this issue until I started working at the Tahirih Justice Center in 2015, actually 2 offices over from Jeannie. And that's where I learned that this was still such a huge, widespread problem in the United States. And it was disturbing, to say the very least. The more I learned about forced child marriage in the United States, I also learned that it's a very nuanced issue that doesn't just look one way. So that's, I think, a major misconception that we have to move past, is that the only way for a child or someone to be forced into a marriage is to have a gun to their head. That's not what it looks like necessarily. So force, fraud, and coercion can take on many, many different forms. It can be very overt or it can be really subtle, but either way, they're still devastatingly effective, whether it's physical abuse, verbal abuse, threats, family and community pressure, threats to expel someone from their community or cut ties with family, short-term grooming, lifelong grooming, bounded choices where someone is essentially presented a choice of, well, marry this person or face horrendous consequences. That's not really a choice. So it's important to understand that it is a very complex issue. And that was really the whole reason for wanting to make the documentary, is that there is so much complexity to each and every survivor's story. It is a challenge to capture the scope of what it looks like in the United States. So every story is an important piece of a much larger picture. And the more pieces we have, the better we are equipped to understand the issue as a whole and to address it. An interesting thing started to happen when I made the documentary is I would be having conversations with someone either in a coffee shop or at a barbecue or in line at the grocery store, you know, back when we were all allowed to be in a room together. And I would be talking to someone and describe what child marriage looks like in the United States and that it's still happening. And someone almost every single time would say, oh, wait, my aunt went through that, or I know a friend that went through that, or that happened to my mom. several times I've been having these conversations, and women have said, that actually happened to me. So child marriage affects so many different people in so many different communities from just about every background that we can think of. It's a very diverse issue and not localized to a certain group or particular groups. There's no community that is immune from this problem. And I myself am not an expert. I'm not a frontline professional who is dealing with these cases day in and day out. And still, even in my somewhat removed position as an advocate, the diversity is evidenced by the number of people I talk to on a regular basis who share with me that someone close to them, someone they know, or even they themselves, were forced into marriage in this country as a child. So there's a universality to it, and I really believe that ending child marriage is not a partisan issue. This is something we should all be able to get behind. It's about ending a widely recognized human rights abuse and protecting children. So on that note, I encourage you to open your ears, open your minds and your hearts, take these stories in, process them, and then think about what you can do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you for being here with us. And now we're going to have a short break, and we'll be going into the breakout room.
Thanks. Thank you, Rima. So we are going to take a 5-minute break. So we'll give you a chance to take a deep breath, take a stretch, move around. I'm going to put a timer on, and I'm going to share my screen with that Google timer, so we'll know exactly when 5 minutes is up, and then we'll all come back together. So we'll take that break now. You're welcome to turn off your camera and hit mute and take a quick break. Thank you.
And Anna, you might want to pause the recording. Thanks.
All right, welcome back, folks. Okay, welcome to the second half. So what's going to happen next is we are going to break into some small groups. And really the purpose of this session is to hear the stories of the 4 survivors that have joined us on the call today. And what's going to happen, some of the logistics that are going to happen is we're going to break into groups. And you'll stay with your small group, and you'll spend a little less than 20 minutes. The survivors will share their story for about 10 minutes, and then you've got some folks leading in those small groups. Sara, Max, myself, and Nancy will be leading us through some reflection where we can ask some questions and reflect on what we've heard in those stories and how we're feeling about it. So after about 20 minutes, then the survivors will swap groups, and so you'll get a new story, and we'll do a second round of the same thing, hearing a story and having some time for response and reflection, and then we'll all be coming back together. So that's what's going to happen. We do ask in those small groups that if you're able to turn your cameras on, because it's so much nicer to tell a story to people we see who are looking at us and nodding along and showing their kind of nonverbal response. And so if you're comfortable, it'd be great to have those cameras on while we're in those small groups. So I'm looking at the clock, and I'll say to Paul, our technical facilitator, that will take about 20 minutes a session. And so we'll be working here from about a little after 4 to 4:45. So when we get in those small groups, we'll have our facilitators say hi and kind of go through the idea of those small groups again, a story and then a response. And then Paul, if you could send us a message when we're about 18 minutes in that we should start wrapping up and then changing, and then we'll do the change. And then when we've gone through both stories, when Paul closes the breakout rooms, you'll get a little warning. How much time for that last warning on the breakouts, Paul? 60 seconds?
Sure, we can do 60.
Okay, sure. So when we're really all going to come back together, a window will pop up and it'll say you've got 60 seconds, and you can just let the timer run down, and then we'll all come back together and we'll wrap up there. Okay, so that's what we're up to. Ready to roll, Paul? Great.
Thank you to the facilitators, but most of all, thank you to the survivors who are taking the lead and telling their story in order to end child marriage in California, starting with California and elsewhere. We need to join New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. We're supposed to be the liberal state, and it's still legal, and there's no minimum age. So thank you to the survivors once again, and to everybody who's attending. So our specifics are simple, is that, and those asks will be available on the last slide of the PowerPoint. And what we'd like you to do is sign our digital campaign on Action Network. And Anna, please post it in the chat. And this digital campaign will go to all the elected officials. So we need to bombard them with letters, basically indicating that their constituents want to end child marriage in California. The other thing is that we would like you to reach to your connections in local city and counties. And we have a resolution that you can also go to the California Coalition to End Child Marriage.org, and you can email us and we'll customize the resolution. It's a non-binding resolution that you can take to your city council and to your county and basically indicate to them, I want you to pass this resolution to end child marriage. So we can use that in a campaign, social media campaign, and our advocacy with elected officials. So far what we have done is interacted through my speaking engagements, either in person or digitally, with over 100,000 people. Again, we need to raise awareness. We need to educate the public in order for us to end child marriage and prevent future victims from happening. So participate in the digital writing campaign. Email us from our website. Anna, please indicate that. Our advocacy part in the California Coalition to End Child Marriage is CA Coalition. And we'll send you the resolution. At this time, Peggy Wang is going to lead that effort in the city of Yorba Linda. We have Greg Brass leading it in Mission Viejo, Diane Dixon in Newport Beach, Dr. Jose Moreno in Anaheim, Ahmed Zahra in city of Fullerton, and Doug Chafee and Michele Steele leading it for the Orange County Board of Supervisors. And so we will let you know once we get these resolutions passed. And also, call your elected officials. You can still meet with them virtually. You know that at the end of the day, the staffers have to give a report to their elected officials saying, we received 100 calls on ending child marriage, 10 calls on Social Security, 10 calls on healthcare, 1 call on, I don't want to wear a mask because I hate it. And so basically, please help us do these things. You've heard the stories, you heard from the speakers. We have to end child marriage, and California can. And I also would like you to RSVP for the next summit on August 5th, because that's going to be our advocacy summit. So I hope that you will do all these asks that we've asked of you and come and report to us. And when you meet with these elected officials or when you call them, let us know. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Rima. So we've just got a big list of things we can do to take action right now, and we want to just turn up the heat and take it a little bit further. So the question that I'm going to ask, just like we did in those breakout sessions, you can get your fingers on the chat. What is your next move? What is something that you can do right now? So that's the question on the table, and we'd like to, if you just fill the chat with all the things that you are ready to roll on and that you're ready to take action on, and we can fill it up and we can inspire each other with the actions that that you're ready to take. So we'll give you a few moments to fill up that chat area with the things that you can do right now, right away, based on some of the asks we made. Wonderful, thank you. Give a few more moments for you to let us know what your first step is. Okay, great. Great to see those responses rolling in. So the next thing I'm gonna offer is a checkout and a way for us to say goodbye. If there's no more comments from the folks hosting us, Rima, or others, any thank yous or salutations before we?
Yes, we want to thank, again, we want to thank you, the facilitators. We want to thank everybody who made this summit possible, the speakers, our co-hosts, and all of you who are attending. And please, it's not about numbers, as some of the organizations that I met with, that we don't have enough numbers in California. If it happens to one person, that's one person too many. So we have to end child marriage to end the abuse. Thank you so much. And I want to introduce Kristen Manna, who's our Director of Development. If you're interested to help us in our other campaign, please contact her, Kristen, at globalhope365.org. And thank you everyone for participating in this and helping us. I really would like you to commit to help us end this. And you all will, correct? Okay.
All right, thanks, Rima. So just a last little thing, we're gonna invite you to check out. So we're asking you just 3 words that capture what's on your mind, capture what you want to do next, and what this 2 hours together has brought up in you. So last thing we're going to ask of you is type your 3 words into the chat, hit enter, and then you can wave and hit leave meeting, and that'll be your ticket out the door. So thank you so much. Ready to mobilize. That's a great one. Thanks, Alan. Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you for your time. Oh, thanks for all the notes and the checkouts.
Oh, let me put that link to the slide deck again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's handy for people again at the end. There's the link again.
And I'm sure everybody knows that you can save the chat on your computer. Do you want to go over, Maggie?
Sure, if you look where you enter words, there's 3 dots and you can hit save chat. And you can save the chat on your computer if you want to. Yeah.
And then if you're like some of us, click on the show and folder so you know where Zoom saved it, because it's not always obvious.
Yeah.
And you can move it where you know where you have it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Anna's going to send the links of the recording and the URLs so you'll have all the materials at hand, because you need them at hand for action.
You're going to report to us August 5th.
Clock is ticking.
Okay. Well, that concludes our event. I'm watching the participant numbers kind of go down as people check out and leave the meeting.
Yes. And we have awesome speakers for August 5th. Some of them are with us here today. Eleanor Gutton, thank you so much. And we're going to have Senator Joe Dunn, retired from UCI Law School. And we will let you know about all and others to be announced. So thank you so much again, everybody, for attending. And let's get it done.
Yeah. We can probably stop the recording now.
Mm-hmm.